is that Keith Lashbrook and Vance Cherry are still out there, they're just out there. So their name needs to be known. So he had parents adopting kids, paying for them monthly, stalling this process when they should have already been in the States. And they were probably never going to come to the States. There was always these hang-ups that nobody really understood because they're in Haiti and you're here and you can trust them.
Kids even at the little kids home were exposed to pornography.
What happens if this abuse happens to our own children?
The fact that they are more concerned about the way you're responding. Dr. Michael Brown could have reached out to Globe and been like, yeah, Keith needs to sit down while we do this investigation. But instead he's reaching out to you, being like, you shouldn't be handling it this way. Why are you so concerned about that? You got all the time to like send Facebook messages to all of your old grad students about what they can and can't post on social media, but you're not doing anything about this.
Children in Haiti are literally being sexually abused. What's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of the Wake Up and Win podcast. We're your host, Blaise.
And Christina. And tonight we have a kind of heavy episode with a couple, Erich and Kjersti, who adopted kids from an orphanage in Haiti. And it's crazy because this is all connected back to Dr. Michael Brown. He was part of the cover-up of this, along with Globe International, and Fire School Ministry.
Yeah.
It's all connected. This whole thing that he does of don't talk about it.
Don't take it a legal route.
Mm-hmm.
We'll do it internally.
Everything we saw at IHOP KC, that was not his first time doing that.
Not his first rodeo.
Yeah.
And just so happens to be right in the timing where he is going through his own investigation for sexual misconduct, clergy sexual misconduct from many years ago. So
No, go ahead.
Well, the whole cover-up culture, people could say, well, they just want to let the process play out, but really at the end of the day, it's a playbook that we've watched happen. And hearing this couple's story, honestly, is heartbreaking, but it's also powerful. I mean, it's very, very healing in the sense of watching the way that the Lord has kind of spoken to them over the years and helped them process all this was very powerful.
Yeah,
because the parents are victims in this situation as well. But yeah, guys, dive in on this third interview regarding this issue and just share it with your friends. Like, share, subscribe, all the stuff. We appreciate your support in following this channel and helping these stories get out there. All right, guys, let's dive right in. Welcome to the podcast, Erich and Kjersti. Great to see you guys.
Yeah, welcome.
It's good to be here.
Awesome. Well, guys, I know that you've told us a little bit off the record, but tell us how this came back up. Obviously, this all happened in 2010-ish, around that time, and it's 2025. What sparked this conversation coming back to the forefront for you guys?
I was visiting my family in Washington, and Tom and Carolyn Berry reached out to me and asked if I would be willing to have a phone call with them. And so I said, of course. And they called me up and just were asking me some questions about everything that had taken place in 2010 and 2011. And they were really pivotal and instrumental in walking through that experience with us. Mm-hmm. And so just touching base with them again and talking about some of it again, just kind of brought it back. And then I reached out to Natalie and Melissa to see if anyone was asking them questions. And so we just reconnected and had a Zoom call out on the deck and caught up. And that's when I found out that the Dr. Brown investigation was raising questions about the Haiti situation. And so then, the Laura Lynn was asking questions and doing interviews, and the Roy's report, and it just started getting traction. And we just thought, maybe it's time, maybe this is it. Maybe justice will finally.
Have you guys kind of felt, on that note, over the years that this would come back up? Or I know you sent us a really powerful blog, Kjersti, just about kind of letting go and trusting God with all those things, and having, that healing in your heart, but also still wanting justice, but not out of a vengeance mindset, but really just a closure, hopefully. Can you talk about that a little bit or speak to that?
Yeah, I mean, in 2010, 2011, it was really hard. I think just hearing the kids' stories and knowing that these men were still walking free, and I just really struggled with it. And yeah, I don't know. After a couple of years of me just being frustrated, and I don't know, I became kind of obsessed with justice and taking these guys down and the kids having closure and all of this. And finally, Erich just was like, you got to let this go. Like, you got to trust God that justice will come. And it may not be in this lifetime, you know, it might not be until after. And I was just like tired, you know? And so I had to lay it down and release it to God. But it's not like we forgot about it. You know, we still think about them. And every time I tell the story, it's still painful. But it's more for me, like, about what those kids experienced, like the weight of it. Like, I don't know how to explain it, but it's not like something was done against me. It's like I'm carrying the weight of what happened to these kids. And just like the fact that there's been no justice for that it's been a struggle.
Yeah. The stories were pretty heavy too. So, the more that we just wanted to deal with it, the more those stories just resurfaced. So it was something that we were struggling to, it kind of needed to be shelved at some point, because it's been a long time between the event and now. And so.
Yeah, it's a lot to bring that up over and over, I'm sure. So that makes sense. Well, here we are now. It's 2025, and Dr. Michael Brown, is in the midst of his own allegations, and it's brought up a lot of stuff. So I'd like to hear, just how did you guys initially get connected to each other, Fire School and Ministry, Dr. Brown, Globe, Haiti, just because obviously everybody knows, you guys are part of the story of adopting the children. There was a big cover up, and but how did that initial connection happen for you guys?
For us, as far as connections go, well, I think we're both very missions minded, and we were both involved in the medical missions at Fire. And so I think because we wanted to do missions so much, that we stayed with Fire instead of Brownsville. And then I think through some of the electives like TESOL and through medical missions that we started connecting.
Hey guys, this episode is brought to you by Wake Up and Win Insurance. We help clients all over the nation with their term life, whole life, or universal life insurance, and we're definitely happy to help you with a consultation.
Check the description below for more info.
I was on my way I would sometimes go to a small church in Snohomish, Washington, and sometimes I would go to a different church, but it was a longer drive. And one Sunday morning I was running late, and all of a sudden I just felt like I was supposed to go to this other church. And I was like, but I'm going to be super late. But I just felt this draw to go to this other church. And so I went to the other church, and Dr. Brown was speaking there about this school of ministry and the students in it and the purpose of it. And I was just like, that's what I want to do. And I was at that point in my life where I needed to make a decision about next steps. And so, yeah.
And is that where you guys met? Is that where you guys met at school? Okay, cool.
So we met in the medical missions class that he was talking about.
Very cool. Okay, awesome. And then talk to us about, your first time in Haiti, or what drew you guys to Haiti, because eventually you adopted from Haiti. So kind of give us that story, if you would.
Well, it was through that medical missions class that we did a 3-month internship in the mountains of Haiti. So it was a small team. I think there was 5 students and 2 leaders. And we worked with clinics up in the mountains, and we got to do all kinds of crazy things that we probably shouldn't have been allowed to do. But we just fell in love with the people of Haiti. And we started dating after we got back to the U.S. From that trip. And we got married a year later. And then we spent a year in Irian Jaya doing missions. But the whole time we were in Irian Jaya, we just kept thinking about Haiti and the people of Haiti. And so we came home to have our first, our daughter. And we thought, you know what, let's check out the possibility of going back to Haiti instead. And so that's when we called up Fire, and because we were missionaries through Fire's mission sending agency. So they were like our oversight. And so we just said, instead of going back to Irian Jaya, we would like to explore the possibility of returning to Haiti. And that's when they hooked us up with a team going to visit the Lashbrook Ministry
Gotcha.
orphanage.
Gotcha. Okay. On that, let's dive right into adopting the kids. Tell us a little bit about that process. And I know from the other interviews that like we've heard a lot of stories about having to go back and forth quite a bit, even a year's worth of going back and forth and visiting until everything was finalized. Was that your experience? And how many kids did you guys adopt? And let's just go into that.
Well, I think I don't even think it was on our radar, the idea of adopting the kids. But we ended up adopting 2 boys. They weren't brothers, but they were 2 that were still looking for a family. And Keith Lashbrooks, while we were there, pointed that out because we were pretty fond of the 2, and we spent a lot of time just hanging out with them and being part of them, and so he's the one that kind of put it into our hearts. Hey, look, maybe we should consider adopting these 2 boys. And I don't think we knew anything that it was anything wrong. I mean, it seemed like a really good idea at the time. We were in love with the boys. We were in love with the orphanage and all the kids there, and so yeah.
I've always wanted to adopt since I was a kid. And so we didn't go there with that intention. We were just there to explore and make connections. And when we fell in love with these 2 little boys, it still wasn't on our radar. And when we came back to the States, we waited a little bit because we were like, there's that honeymoon phase and all of the emotions and all of that. And so we waited. And a couple weeks in, I asked him, I said, what do you think about adopting? And he's like, well, I've been thinking about it too. And I was like, well, let's pray about it. And let's take a couple weeks and we'll come back together. And so we just kind of went on with life and prayed about it. And then when we came back together, I was like, well, what are you thinking? And he's like, I think we should do it. And I was like, well, which one? And which boy? And he was like, well, I think we should adopt both of them. Because I had fallen in love with the younger one and he had fallen in love with the older one. And I was like, I feel the same way. And so we both kind of heard the same thing and felt drawn to adopt both of them. And so we started that process and decided to stay in the States to make the money and do all the paperwork. And so he got a job and we were in Washington at the time. And we just, started trying to raise money and pay for it.
Got it.
I have a question about whenever you went to Haiti. So your story is a little bit different because you guys were going there, like you said, without the intention. It's not like you were planning on adopting. So you were going there as missionaries, right? And so were you actually at the orphanage, like staying there, missionaries? And while you were there, you didn't notice anything like weird or pick up on anything. It was just everything was good while you were there.
Yeah, it seemed like I've been to other orphanages, and nothing struck me as being out of place. And we've like asked ourselves, how did we miss it? Because we were there for 2 weeks.
Okay, that's what I was going to ask is how long were you there? Okay, but everything seemed normal at that time.
We were staying in, there was a home for the younger kids, so like toddlers, preschoolers, babies, and then the older boys were down the road at a different campus. And we were staying at the home with the younger kids. And so I think there was less activity in that house.
Right.
But
okay. And so that means you were interacting a lot with Keith Lashbrook. And then did you also interact with Vance Cherry as well?
I don't think he was there yet.
Okay.
So this would have been in 2007. 2000.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, gotcha. Okay.
So you guys were there for 2 weeks, and then during that 2 weeks, that's when Keith said you guys should consider adopting.
Yeah.
Okay. So after that 2 weeks, you came back, you worked, you talked about it, you prayed about it, then you made that move. When you decided to, and you adopted both at the same time, basically. Okay. And what was the process?
It was long.
Yeah.
It was 2.5 years from that point until the earthquake happened. And there were so many setbacks and it was just taking forever. And now we look back and it's obvious that they were never planning on releasing the kids. They were getting $200 a month per kid. for
Okay,
food and
so
stuff.
let's just hone in on that for a second. So for the viewing audience that hasn't watched the other two interviews yet, so Keith Lashbrook is a part of, was it Globe International or Globe Missions? What was it called? Globe International,
Globe International.
which was underneath Liberty Church. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Yeah, Liberty Church is where that,
Liberty
In
Church.
Brownsville.
Brownsville.
School of Ministry.
Yeah, you're yeah.
Okay,
All
so
connected.
it's all connected.
They were all connected. Yeah.
Yeah, and so, so Keith Lashbrook is running the orphanage underneath Globe Missions, and Dr. Brown's connected in the sense that he's a part of that whole network. And when everything started kind of bubbling up, he was a part of trying to, what I would call now, cover up, silence, slow the process, all that stuff. So you guys decide, yes, we're going to do this, because there's this feeling of like, well, okay, Keith Lashbrook's trying to get these kids adopted. It sounds great, but really he gets you guys on the hook for $200 per child. So you're paying $400 into that orphanage per month for the next 2 years, 2.5 years. And I heard from the other ladies that I was getting the sense, talking to Natalie, talking to Melissa, that once the earthquake hit, it was like everything really literally shook to where all these kids got released. Is that what happened with you guys? Everything just kind of got uncovered and the kids got released to you, or was that?
Yeah, so Natalie called and said that that the U.S. government had agreed to grant humanitarian parole. So any of the children that were in the process of being adopted were going to be able to come home to their adoptive families and finish the process. Mm-hmm. And so she was looking for parents to fly down and help evacuate them to the embassy. His passport was expired, so I got to go. But you could tell there was issues because there was panic when we get to the orphanage, and Keith was not himself. He was super stressed, and I don't know. There was just tons of tension. Obviously, I just assumed it was the earthquake and moving 41 kids, a couple of hours into the middle of the earthquake zone. And so I just assumed that's what was going on. But we got to the embassy, and we were stuck there for 5 days. And we weren't expecting that. So we didn't have enough diapers. We didn't have food. And so the military was sharing their MREs with us. And we were sleeping on cardboard boxes, on the tile floors. And there was just all these hangups. And I don't think that the embassy had all of the paperwork that they should have had. And so I don't know. There was just confusion and chaos once we got to the embassy.
Yeah.
I think a lot of it got chalked up to, well, the paperwork probably was destroyed in the earthquake, so you just get a pass at that point to get them out of that area, and that's what ended up being, was that we just took them here and straight to refugee
Eventually,
status.
the embassy released them.
Yeah.
And then they loaded us onto like a C-17 and.
Wow, that's crazy. So for people listening, just to make very clear, from what you guys are saying and what some of the other parents have said, is that it seems pretty clear now, hindsight, that there was never any intention of Keith Lashbrook really, of you guys actually adopting these children. So he had parents adopting kids, paying for them monthly, and stalling this process when they should have already been in the States. And they were probably never going to come to the States. There was always these hangups that nobody really understood because they're in Haiti and you're here and you can trust him and he's telling you this is why. But then the earthquake happens, and just literally only because of a natural disaster did these kids even get released.
Yeah. Wasn't it that we found out that the oldest child's father was still alive when we were told that he had died? So there were supposed to be death certificates for both the parents to be able to set up a child for adoption, and that's pretty common in Haiti because they have starve periods when the harvest or the food isn't available. So if you're a family that's trying to take care of multiple kids, you got to feed the parents priority, because otherwise the whole family will die. So sometimes the children get, they're last on the end of receiving any food. So rather than watch them starve, they'll put them in an orphanage and then come back and get them later on. Well, I don't believe these children were supposed to be given to someone else. They were going to be left by these parents in the orphanage until they were old enough to be, helpful around farm.
And
Oh,
I'm sure Natalie
interesting.
told you, but a lot of the death certificates were forged. And after we brought the kids back to the States, parents started showing up looking for their kids who were gone.
Okay, I knew that the death certificates were forged and there was some like paperwork fraud she mentioned. I didn't know there were parents. You mean parents in Haiti were looking for their kids who had come to the United States? Are you serious?
Yeah.
I
Didn't
remember
know that.
Yeah.
somebody. Yeah.
Wow, that's crazy.
We knew for sure that the oldest child's dad was still alive, and that was not supposed to be true.
How'd you find that out?
He actually lived at the orphanage or in a little like shack next to the orphanage. And so I don't think like he wasn't very functional. He wasn't able to work and provide for them. So I think he just lived close by so that he could be near them.
Right, but it was still just the fact that you were lied to and these
Yeah.
death certificates were forged is so strange.
And people can like almost write these things off as I know in the last interview with Natalie, she said that when she was talking to Keith, I think it was Natalie, could have been Melissa, but it basically said, hey, this has gone on and with Vance. And he said, well, Natalie, if everything that this is Haiti, if everything that went wrong, I had to make a phone call, I'd be on the phone all day, kind of just shut it down, almost like a way to excuse things based on culture, because we don't know the culture because it's overseas. And it's like, really, at the end of the day, though, corruption is corruption. So if there's a lie, and Keith Lashbrook and Vance Cherry had the ability to know those things, as far as the fact that the kid's parent lives next door, and he's telling you that the kid's parent is dead. It's like, it's clear as day that this is a lie. If they're lying about that, what else is going on? So that's pretty messy. Okay, so let's move to you guys. Earthquake happens. You get your kids. They're home now. They're with you. Now, at this point, I know you told us off the record before that you have biological children. I know that's a part of the story. So how old are your kids at the time when these two move in with you guys?
So we first met the boys when they were 2 and 3. And when we brought them home, they were 4 and 5. And our kids were 3 and 1.5. So Asia is our oldest. She was 3. And Jake, our son, was 1.5 when we brought them home. And Asia like fell in love with them immediately, started calling them her brothers. Like she loved them. And it was tons of fun. You know, they'd never had a real bath, like been immersed in water. They'd never had ketchup, like just they'd never seen snow. And so we just had, you know, months and months of just first experiences that we were able to share with them. And it was pretty fun.
I think I remember the teacher at the public school was complaining because they still wanted to squatty potty on top of the toilet.
They would stand on the toilet and squat and with the door open. So
Yeah.
the whole class is standing.
That's funny.
Okay, so these kids come move in with you, and let's just talk about what was the first sign? Did you get a phone call, or what was the first sign of a problem, that there had been a problem? Were you noticing things first, or were you told something by your kids, or did you get a phone call from Natalie, or what was that for you guys?
Well, we brought them home in early February of 2010. And in April, Natalie called me, and we were friends at that point just because she was the adoption coordinator. And so we'd known each other for a couple of years. And she called me and just started sharing some things that kids had been sharing with their adopted families. And since she was the adoption coordinator, they were calling her and just saying, hey, my kid is saying this. And so she was calling the families to let them know that there was talk of abuse at the orphanage. And she just wanted to warn us. And we were taken off guard because we had been there, not seen, signs of it. It wasn't obvious to us. And our boys they were adapting fairly well. They were having trouble with some eating issues and like holding food in their mouth. And so there's some issues with kids who are not fed well. And so we were seeing stuff like that, but we hadn't seen any signs of abuse. And so we thought, well, since our boys were young and they were in this house, maybe all of the abuse was at that house for the older boys. And so we just started watching more carefully and being aware that there could be something there. And we didn't really see any signs of anything until we went, it was August, and we went to our best friend's wedding in Tennessee. We were living in South Carolina at the time. And so we left all 4 of our kids with his mom. And I told him that we should tell her. And he didn't want to because he didn't want anyone to see our boys as being damaged or broken. And he just was like, we don't know if it's true yet. Let's not tell anyone. And so we didn't. And then she called us one day and told us a couple things that she didn't think were a big deal. And we were like, well, it might be. So don't leave the kids alone until we get back. And so we came back and we spoke with the boys separately and just asked them questions about their life in the orphanage and tried to find out what was going on, because it was obvious that something had happened.
Yeah. I think it was at this point that we were confronting them, and they did break down in front of us, and they were afraid to tell us. And
we weren't confronting them; we were
well,
debriefing them. Like we were like trying to ask them questions without scaring them. You know,
Sure.
like trying to invite them to open up with us, because we knew they would probably not want to talk about it.
Yeah, but then they also confessed to us that they were told not to say anything because we would reject them.
Yeah. Yeah. And you know, it's just it's so sad because the abusers, they lie. Clearly they lie to these kids, and that's why Keith was freaking out when the earthquake happened. I mean, I put it all together hearing, I think it was Natalie saying she saw him, like, basically he was like on his deathbed acting like he was sick or something and sweating a lot and all this stuff. And I'm like, well, of course he's freaking out because all these children are about to be released to where they can begin to tell their story. And so he's got to put in their minds, hey, if you tell this story, you'll be rejected. And and so I can imagine the emotions, for both of you, but I just, I'm a dad, so Eric, I just relate to this feeling of like, okay, these boys, I gotta confront them about this. I gotta figure out what's going on in my home, and at the same time, you're like, okay, these are also my new boys, and it's. Can you talk about those feelings a little bit, and how did you deal with that as you were realizing what might be going on?
I think at this point we were starting to do a little more research into what that kind of abuse looks like in children, and what you would expect to see. So you start paying attention to patterns and play and behavior, and we started realizing, oh wow, we really are dealing with kids that have been sexually abused in a really heavy way, and so I think at some point we were trying to figure out what to do about it. So there was a lot of policing that took place in our house. I can't allow that kind of abuse to spread to my own kids, and so I remember putting up cameras in our house, door alarms, so that if they exited the room that they were staying in without our consent, and at night we would hear it, and we really did become police in our own house, which was.
It was just 2 different sounds, so that if they left their room and went to the bathroom and went back to their room, we would know. But if they went into Asia's room, we would know.
Yeah.
So it wasn't like they weren't allowed to move without asking. It was just so that we knew where they were.
Yeah.
But we had become police within our own house, and I guess the question would be, how long is this going to continue for, or is this what we're going to have to do for the rest of our lives to be able to keep these boys? And
so then, as time went on, Natalie would call us with more stories, and the boys would open up and share more with us. And
some of the stories are pretty heavy, and Hard to.
The kids, even at the little kids' home, were exposed to pornography on a very regular basis. That ended. I asked the youngest about it, and he told me, and they would end violently. And he motioned like with a knife across the neck and different things. And so these kids were like, this was just part of their life.
My goodness.
And our oldest one was taken from the orphanage every day by Vance Cherry for hours and groomed by him and who knows what. And so this was part of their play, and they didn't know that it was wrong, and they knew they didn't like it. The little guy had been, physically and sexually abused. And I asked him if anyone had ever, because he said that they would put a belt around his neck and yank on it and push him to the ground. And I asked him if anyone had ever touched his private area, and he hung his head and he said, yeah. He said, everyone. And the older one was pinned down and had, oral sex forced on him. And so the further we got into it, the more we realized, like, these kids have been horribly abused, and they're victims. But now they pose a threat to our kids, and just that turmoil of them being victims and posing a threat at the same time was like heart-wrenching for us.
Yeah.
Because we were missionaries, and so our heart was to walk them through their healing and to be there for them and to protect them and to fight for justice for them and to help them find wholeness. But on the other hand, we have 2 younger kids who also needed protection.
Yeah, I think my first response was, they're ours. We've got to figure out how to deal with this, and that was where I stood. But I think at some point Kjersti was throwing out, what happens if this abuse happens to our own children? What now? And so it became a real issue for me, and I was really struggling with it for a while.
It was that question of, would we be able to forgive ourselves if something happened to our daughters? And would they be able to forgive us? And would, like, even the video cameras and the door chimes, and when I'm making dinner, I have to have the 2 boys in one room and my other kids in another room. And so they're starting to feel like villains in their own home, and that's not healthy. And so we started having to ask the question, like, what's best for them even? Like, at some point they're going to realize we don't trust leaving them alone in the room with their siblings, and that didn't feel right either. And so it was just a torrent of emotions and questions and thoughts. And we were meeting with our pastor, who had walked through similar situations with other families, and so he was basically saying, like, you're not going to know when this healing takes place or if it takes place, and they might not act out for 10 years. They might see a billboard or a movie that triggers something, and who's going to be the easiest target for them. And he just said, you're basically going to be police in your own home for the next 18 years. And if you have the faith for that, like, that's your choice, but you have to be willing to take that risk with your other kids. And then we were still just struggling for so long, because they had told them that if the kids told us what happened, that we would give them away.
And so
at one point, our pastor looked at us and he said, there's an element of pride in you thinking that you're the only ones that can walk them through their healing. And you might need to trust God with that. And it was like a turning point for us, because we realized that we did have to place them back in God's hands, and trust God to put them in the right family where they could find healing and not put anyone else at risk. And it was by far the hardest decision we had ever made, and to this day, still the hardest thing we've ever done.
Agreed.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. I can tell that's really tough, and so thank you for sharing that with us. I'm going to ask another question, kind of, unless you have a. So, obviously, it's a devastating story, and each story we hear, it affects people's. It not only affected the kids, that were adopted, also affected the kids that are biological kids of these families, and then it also affects you guys. It affects your lives. We've talked to different people where it's really, really taking a toll on their personal lives and finances and just everything. I mean, it can. So when I look at the process when this became known to the organization, just on a very practical level, even if it's just a secular organization, not even a Christian missionary organization, a secular organization, when you find out that there's a situation going like this, it's necessary to disclose that that's gone on in the children that you're adopting. That's a necessary component. So it's not like we're trying to find, like, who do we blame? Who can we tar and feather? At the end of the day, it's like, no, these things on a very practical level have hurt and destroyed some people's lives and affected people's lives. We know God is a healer. Obviously, we know that. At the same time, we look and go, okay, well, where's the accountability lie? And we look at the situation where it became known. I guess my question is, walk us through the process for you guys as you began to realize that Globe knew and Doug Gaiman maybe knew. And then, of course, when you found out that Keith was doing this, and that, just walk us through that revelation of even the task force and all that stuff that was put together, or law enforcement. What was you guys' involvement in talking to any law enforcement, or did that happen? Or if you could walk us down that process.
Well, I think as believers, our first move was to talk to Keith, because we didn't know that he was complicit, and we didn't know that he was an abuser. So we reached out to him, and he did not respond, and shut us down pretty quick. And so then I was like, well, that's suspicious.
What was that shutdown look like? Was that so that was probably an email conversation, I'm guessing, or a phone call, or?
Yeah, I don't remember I think we emailed him, and we would try texting him, and he just at some point stopped responding to us. And I just thought, this is weird. Like, if he loves these kids the way that we thought he did, he would be here trying to help translate, trying to get to the bottom of it, trying to figure out what was going on so that he could prevent it. Like, in my head, I was like, this doesn't make sense. Why is he shutting us down? And so then we reached out to Globe, and it was the same thing. Doug Gaiman was like, well, I've never been there, and blah, blah, blah. And Natalie's
so that
like, well,
was
that's
the conversation to you, because I was trying to put that together too about Doug when he said, I've never been to Haiti. And Doug was the leader of Globe at that time. He told that to you, or he told that to Natalie?
I don't remember. It was so long ago, all the details.
Yeah.
I just remember reaching out to Globe, and I have a letter that I wrote, I think, to Michael Collins, who was put in charge of the task force.
Yep.
To investigate. And so I have a letter that I wrote to them, and I was still this naive, like, thinking that this mission sending agency is going to do the right thing.
Yeah.
And I was like, I don't understand. Because even, like you said, a secular organization would have been like, what?
Right.
Like, if there's even a hint of inappropriate behavior with a child, like, people take that serious.
Yeah.
And there was just none of that. No response. No concern. If anything, they were just covering up for Keith, trying to make excuses. And I mean, at one point, I'm sure Natalie and Melissa told you, they turned it around and threatened to sue us.
I didn't know about that. Tell us about that.
Yeah. Well, after Globe didn't respond and was obviously doing nothing, we were like, this can't be happening. And so me and Natalie and Melissa decided to write the stories for our kids, to write our stories and send them to everybody who had ever supported the Lashbrooks. And so somebody who had worked with Keith was willing. She kind of snuck us a database of everyone who had supported him. We Googled his name and found any church that had ever hosted them. And then I believe we sent these truth letters to even all the other Globe missionaries, because we thought they need to know what Globe is doing.
Yeah.
And we need to take out their funding, because this is still happening. They're still in Haiti. There's still, I don't know how many kids were still there.
Jeez.
And we were just like, nobody's doing anything. And so we wrote these letters and told our kids the stories and mailed them out, like hundreds of them. And we got back some pretty ugly responses. And then we got back some responses that were obviously shocked and surprised and said that they were going to withhold their funding. And that was our only win. Like,
Yeah.
Keith had to come off the field. Globe had to ask him to step down. They weren't getting, I think we destroyed their funding.
It's
and
a
that
big
was
win.
that was our only win, though.
Yeah.
And we just kept waiting. And then it was during that time that Tom and Carol and Barry stepped in, and they really walked with us and encouraged us. And they were even questioning, like, if you guys told Fire, so Fire was the other half, like when Brownsville School Revival split, and then Fire became the other half. And so you had Globe International, and then you had Fire International. So when you say Dr. Brown was connected to Globe, he was, right? So
Right.
they were all one, and then they split. And we were with Fire International. And so Dr. Brown, we called Dr. Peters when we found out about our boys. And he was the head of Fire International. He worked
Who's
closely
Dr.
with
Peters?
Dr. Brown. He was the head of the mission sending agency at Fire. So he had been working with Dr. Brown very closely for years. He was the one who sent us to Haiti to work with the Lashbrooks.
Okay.
We called them when we found out what was going on with the boys. And he was like, yeah, we kind of had a feeling there were some allegations against Keith. And I was like, what? Like, we're your missionaries. You're our covering. And you didn't tell us that? You know that we're adopting children from an orphanage, and that the person in charge of that orphanage has allegations of misconduct, and you didn't think that we should know that? So I was frustrated.
Oh, yeah.
I was frustrated. And so we stopped turning to Fire for help. That's not entirely true. Mr. Gladstone was great. I don't know if you know him. He was a different professor, and he was supportive and appalled and trying to help us work things out with Globe or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But when we started sending out these truth packets, Dr. Brown messages us and says, hey, or he called us, I don't remember. But he was like, you guys need to back down. Like, you need to do this Matthew 18. And I was like, well, we did. We called Keith. He shut us down. We called Globe. They're not responding. And so this was the next thing we need to do. And he was like, oh, all right, well, you need to try to be above reproach. You need to not post things on social media. You need to not take any legal action. And because at that point, Globe was saying, we had gone to Globe to say, hey, these kids were under your care. They've been abused and they need counseling. Yeah. And Globe said, well, we can't pay for that. That'll make us look guilty. That'll make us look responsible. We can't help you with that.
Okay.
Yeah, I have a letter. I have it in a letter.
Wow.
And I was like, are you kidding me?
If you'll screenshot that letter, you've probably sent it, but if you'll screenshot that, I'll edit it into this part of the podcast, because we do have the letter from Brown that basically says don't post on social media, all the different stuff. But yeah, if you could send that, because that's so interesting to say, because this has been the biggest thing for me is going, okay, Globe, why don't you just like take responsibility for Lashbrook and be like, this was a bad guy. We should have seen it from the beginning, and this is how it affected many people. And I mean, I'm not going to pretend that I know their net worth at Globe at that time, but I know when the Haiti earthquake came, I mean, there was tons of funding that came to missions organization. Anybody that had their hands on Haiti got a ton of funding from all over the place. Mm-hmm. And so I can't imagine that, I can only imagine that they were loaded. And so the fact that they didn't just take responsibility and be like, well, we're going to pay out and deal with this. But instead they're saying, no, we're not going to pay out because that's going to say that we're responsible. But they were responsible.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. But even as a ministry, right? You hear about kids who have been abused, and you can't find it in your heart to try to raise money and help them. Like yeah. And so at that point we were like, well, maybe legally we can make them. And so we had talked with the lawyer to see if we could file a lawsuit on the behalf of the kids just to get them to pay for counseling. Because like for Natalie, she had, how many kids did she adopt? I don't know, like 7. I think it's more now, but it was 7 at the time. And so really we were just trying to get them to do what was right and to cover the counseling. And then we got attacked by all kinds of people telling us that we were being selfish, that we were slandering, that we didn't understand the culture in Haiti. And they tore us apart, and then they threatened to countersue us for slander. And they said that we were lying and all these things. And we're like, well, you've got 41 kids telling the same story. They haven't seen each other since they left Haiti. And they're telling the same story. Like, they're not lying.
And of course,
And
they didn't
there's
sue.
nothing in this
Of course,
for
they
us
didn't
to gain.
counter-sue because they knew they would have been in big trouble if they had, because you get discovery. And
That would be
it's
an
like-
admission.
Exactly. Exactly. Christina, did you have any questions at this point?
Well, I was just thinking whenever you said you guys did that just like the love of a mom, you know, coming together, being like, okay, you're not going to listen to us, Dr. Brown. You're not going to listen to us, Globe. You're not going to listen to us, Keith Lashbrook. All right, here we go. We are mailing everyone that, you know, has supported you. And it's like before, no, it's not really before podcast, but you know, before it's like doing the like footwork to make it happen. And I just think that's so admirable and impressive that y'all did that. And it's a shame that you had to. It's a shame you had to. You should have never been doing that whenever you're already grieving this loss and like finding out all of these terrible things. And in this position, you should have never had, that's not your responsibility. You should have never had to deal with it. But it shows you like the strength of a mom, you know, you're just going to go out there and I don't know.
All of you went to war. And I mean,
exactly,
at the end of the day, it's like, I mean, this was before the popularity of podcasts, at least, and the like, not many things at that time were going viral in the same way. And some people weren't even on social media in 2010, you know, and paying attention. So nowadays we can tag a name and put it out there, which is in some ways, you know, when I think about these podcasts and what's happening with Laura Lynn and what's happening with you guys coming on here, and even the Brown investigation. I don't know what's going to happen with the Dr. Michael Brown investigation here in a week or two, what they're going to say about it with Sarah Monk and with all the stuff that's gone on. But did you guys speak to Firefly? Did you guys talk to Firefly about this at all? No? Okay. But this here is the whistleblowing that has to take place so people can understand, like, this is what's gone on. And when I look at Dr. Brown, the fact that he tried to silence you guys from talking about it on social media, silence you guys. The biggest statement that is so concerning is that it was an illegal activity against children. And one of his statements to you all was, do not go legal with it. What on earth? Like, what in the world? So I don't know if you guys have any comments about Brown's involvement at that time, besides what we've already said, or anything else you want to say about the legal side there.
I still, like, looking back, we trusted, you know, when we reached out to Dr. Brown and he said he was going to meet with Globe, there was a level of trust there because we thought, okay, good. Like, maybe they will hold Doug Gaiman accountable and maybe we'll get somewhere. And Tom Berry was like, you guys told Fire in April and it's November and they're just now meeting with Globe. Like, what is happening?
So that gave 5 months for this to continue on in Haiti.
Yeah.
5
and
months.
Natalie's telling them, like, you got to tell the other adopted families that their kids are at risk. And nobody did that. Natalie did that. Natalie called every family. I never got a call from Globe. They said that they would do it and they did not do it. But in my mind, I'm thinking, I mean, if somebody said that there's abuse against a child, that person gets removed until there's an investigation. Like, even like Dr. Brown, in my mind, should have called Globe and said, Keith needs to be removed until you do an investigation. Like, we're not saying he's guilty or anything, but if there's a question of inappropriate conduct with kids, he should have been removed. No questions asked. I mean, yeah, do an investigation, prove him innocent if he's innocent, but he should never have been allowed to return to that orphanage when those allegations were brought forward. I don't understand it. Like, a secular agency never would have allowed that.
Yeah, they would never have been allowed.
And it's almost like the church culture just encourages you to cover for people instead of exposing it. And that's not what the Bible teaches. The Bible teaches that we should expose things done in the dark, right? Like, shed a light on it. And that's why I appreciate, like, your guys' podcast and Laura Lynn and people just trying to shine a new light on it, because it felt like when we reached out to the church, we got deafening silence.
Wow.
And that's the opposite of what you would expect.
Yeah.
Not only silence, but even like the fact that they are more concerned about the way you're responding. Like you said, they should have reached out to Globe, Dr. Michael Brown could have reached out to Globe and been like, yeah, Keith needs to sit down while we do this investigation. But instead he's reaching out to you being like, you shouldn't be handling it this way. You shouldn't be posting this on social media. You shouldn't. It's like, why are you so concerned about that? You got all the time to like send Facebook messages to all of your old grad students about what they can and can't post on social media, but you're not doing anything
While
about this.
Children in Haiti
it
are
makes
literally
no
being
sense.
sexually abused. It is absolutely mind-boggling, and I just have to say on this point, because you guys speaking up again, it is on behalf of the children of Haiti. It's on behalf of your children that are now grown. It's on behalf of all the ones that were abused, but it's also on behalf of the body of Christ to hear and to change, because this is a Reformation time. So when you tell your story, I just want to encourage you guys, when you tell your story, you might like the justice of what the story, the justice that it brings in some senses is it raises the red flags in people's minds and in leaders' minds to say, we're not going to do this way anymore. We're not going to take allegations like this and say, oh, well, let's focus on the way it's being handled versus it actually being handled. Let's focus on the way it came out. Oh, were you angry? Okay, make sure you stay above reproach in the way you talk about it. It's like, what are you talking about? There's a child being abused. You're telling me to be above reproach in the way I talk about it? Frankly, screw you. Like, that's how it feels, like it's time to flip some tables and bring out some whips. If the leaders in the body of Christ are going to be the type of shepherds like Ezekiel 34 that overlook and leave people in the mud just to protect their reputation and the reputation of those that they run with. I mean, that's at the end of the day what happened. The guys at the top, their reputations were protected. The big churches were protected. Buford Lipscomb, Josh Lipscomb overlooked it. When it was brought to them, I heard it was brought to both of them, and they both just kind of went on with it. And it protects the money, it protects the influence, it protects the power, while the people of God suffer. And anyway, I just commend you guys for speaking up again, and there is a righteous anger behind it from everyone that's involved, and it's necessary. It's necessary for reform.
I think the shock for us was that it did seem obvious that either the image or the finances of a church was more important than a moral issue. Mm-hmm. And a moral issue should have been the priority of the church, no matter what the situation is. And that was not the case here. Yeah, it was protect the leadership, protect their reputation, and I don't know if it had anything to do with the finances or not, but it sounds like it did.
I have a letter that I wrote to Michael Collins, just kind of exhorting them, like, it doesn't matter if paying for counseling makes you look guilty. Like, you have to trust God with that. Like, you have to do the right thing, no matter what happens to you. Like, your reputation is not what's important right now. And we got nothing back, but.
Well, I'll tell you what, it's that statement that you made to him is so true. And this needs to be just kind of a clarion call to leadership in the body of Christ. It's like, these things will come back to haunt your ministries and these people when they say, well, if we pay for this, it's going to make us look guilty. Well, first and foremost, like, you are responsible for the lack of information that you gave to those that were adopting through your agency. I mean, it's plain as day. So therefore, step up and pay the bill. But in the long run, it actually makes you look worse for not paying. You're a missions organization taking care of orphans, and you won't pay for their counseling when they've been sexually abused by one of your ministers. Like, give me a break. So here we are 20 years later, and all we have is this these receipts of conversations that's like, no, it's going to make us look guilty. No, you look guilty as sin right now. And you look like you don't care about children. It's like, no.
And I was going to say, we had told Dr. Brown that Doug Gaiman denied ever going to Haiti, but Natalie worked very closely with Keith because she was the coordinator, and she knew that he had gone to Haiti. Like, she remembered Keith saying, "Oh yeah, Doug's coming this week," and I feel like she said he went like 7 times. Like, she knew that he had been to Haiti, and he's telling us he'd never been there.
This is a really freaky thing for me, because Doug Gaiman's over globe, and he's saying, I've never been there. Once it's all coming to the surface, he's going, oh no, I don't even never even been. So there's 2 things. I'm going to just give him the benefit of the doubt for one moment and say, he's freaking out going, well, I don't want them to know that I kind of saw the red flags, or I want to be as far away as possible. That's number one. Number two is he's implicated and deeply involved.
Yeah, to me, there's only one reason you don't want anyone to know that you went to Haiti.
Yeah.
So that is very messed
And that's
up.
the one that I actually believe. I believe that that's the fact of the matter. And
So we're telling Dr. Brown that they're lying to us, and he's emailing us and saying, trust the process. They have a
me a
task
break.
force. They're investigating it. And he's like, we've told him that they're lying to us, and he's telling us to trust them.
Well, regarding the trusting the task force, Natalie had told us about the woman on the task force specifically who had run an orphanage with her husband. And the only reason she was on the task force was because her ex-husband, she had caught him sexually assaulting a 9-year-old boy or a 9-year-old girl. I can't remember which one, but a 9-year-old. And when she was asked if she reported him, she said, no, he repented. And so this is the brain space of the body of Christ about this issue. It's like, and they take 1 Corinthians 6 or 2 Corinthians, I think it's 1 Corinthians 6. Well, we don't bring a charge, a public charge to the body of Christ. We deal with it in-house. Everything is dealt with in-house versus suing and all this stuff. It's like, guys, that is not applicable. This is literally like a crime.
Especially when there's justice that should be for the child.
Yes. Yes.
That is where they are at fault for, is they are not leaving way for justice for the child. Yeah, you can forgive someone, but what about needs to be dealt with?
The consequences are still
the
there.
Consequences are definitely still there, and they need to be addressed.
But and I don't know if Natalie touched on this, but we found out later from the ICE agent, I believe, that part of the reason they didn't pursue the convictions and everything at that time was because we handled it the way that we did. Like, we handled it the way the church said we should handle it, and it messed up the investigation, because this is a legal issue. We should have gone, and they did, Natalie and Melissa, because their kids were directly abused by Keith, and so they went to the authorities right away. But because we tried to Matthew 18 it delayed justice for how long now? And I'm not saying that's the only reason that justice was delayed, but you can see where the church's model can interfere with the justice system.
Yeah.
Yeah, I want to say that just too, again, for the people listening about the task force, because it reminds me, if people have been following us for a while, know about the IHOP KC, that it'll make sense the way they did their internal investigation. So these internal investigations are meant to get all the information from the parents to find out everything that happened, so that they can cover it up, so that they can handle it in-house and come up. They have time to figure it out. So by the time you guys go to ICE, by the time all this happens, it's all gone.
It all got covered up.
It's all gone.
Yeah.
So it's a shame they come out being like, oh, this is the Christian way to do it. We made our own task force. Tell us everything. And then you find out that now you can't even really do anything because it's all gone. It's just so wrong and so evil. I can't believe
basically the task force was collecting everything we were saying and giving it to Keith.
Yes.
Yeah. It's
so that he knew what he was facing.
Well, and it's the same exact thing that happened at IHOP Kansas City with Mike Bickle. There was a large document that was given to some people internally because they thought we can trust these people, and the document was given to Mike, and he began to reach out to the people that he knew were in the document. And but I can't help but think of the scripture that Paul says to Timothy. I don't remember exactly where it is in Timothy, but he says some men's sins go before them, they're evident, and then some others trail behind them, for the judgment seat, basically. But some men's sins are evident immediately. Like, we just know it. It's like they're exposed day one. It's a done deal. Others say, oh, we don't want to look guilty. We want to cover up. We want to trust the process. And then it trails behind a little bit, but 15, 20 years later, here we are. And it's just crazy that it's all coming to a head for Dr. Michael Brown right now. And this is not a get him because we don't like him or anything like that. The fact of the matter is, he's been involved in sexual allegations, sexual misconduct with a student years ago, also with a congregant, with with Ray's wife, who sadly she passed away. So that's all going on. And now we're finding that he's been covering up using the exact same lines. If I was an investigator, I'd be like, oh my gosh, this is like the trail. It's the exact same lines. Hey, trust the process, believe that nothing's being covered up, and don't go legal. Like handle internally.
And
I'm
don't
like,
go
this
public,
is,
yeah.
and don't talk about it on social media.
Which don't talk about it. I'm sure you guys have thought about this a lot, but I just had the thought, Natalie is the one that reached out to you, not Globe. Natalie reached out to you. If she had not done that,
Wow.
if she had not come out and told you guys, what she was hearing, what was happening, you would have never known, and you might have a very different story for y'all and your family and your children, if she hadn't reached out. So that is the power of telling your story.
That's right.
And
That's right.
that's why it is important to protect other people.
That's right.
So
I struggled with that for a long time, with feeling like God hadn't protected us, because when we went away for that weekend, we prayed, that God would protect our kids while we were gone. And I just really struggled with that and questioned God for a long time. Like, where were you? Like, I feel like you dropped the ball. I feel like you have bigger and better things to do than protect my family. And like, I was frustrated, and I was questioning him, and I was real with him. And in the end, the more we found out and the deeper we got into it, I could see that he was protecting us, but his protection looked different than what I thought it should, but thanks to Natalie speaking out and telling us, our kids were protected, and we were able to make choices to prevent things happening. But it was a hard season.
Yeah.
Well, guys, this has been really good and really, really informative and really powerful. I don't want to just cut it like all of a sudden, but I think you guys have really handled this information really well, and sharing your story really well, really honoring for your kids as well as the kids that you adopted and had to let go of. Any final thoughts that you guys just want to share with the audience as they're kind of hearing you guys are the third and final interview about this? Anything else you guys want to share? Or Christina, do you have any final questions for them?
No, just anything that we left out, or anything that was, important that you were like, I really need everyone to know this, or anything like that.
Well, I could share just that story I shared with you earlier about that healing process.
Yeah, please do.
So we were at your church, actually, and I was in a prayer class, and they were
Small
like,
world.
we're gonna spend a couple minutes just practicing listening to God. And this was a year and a half after I think that we said goodbye. And so they were still on my mind a lot, but not every day. And so I wasn't thinking about them at that moment. And in this prayer class, they're like, we're just going to practice listening to God. And so I shut my eyes, and I heard God loud as day just say, they're fine. And I knew immediately who he was talking about. And he showed me a picture of them in his hands. And he just said, they've been in my hands the whole time. Like, they were never in your hands. And the guilt that I had felt for giving them up was released, because I knew that they were in God's hands and that we were just part of their story. And it was just kind of circled back to us making that decision to put them back in God's hands, and then he gave me just this beautiful picture of the fact that they were never even in our hands, and he had them the whole time. And so that really brought I don't know how to explain it. It brought some healing from my heart, because I dealt with just a lot of guilt.
That's powerful.
Yeah, I think we both did, because we believed that we could have done it, but
Well, and
we weren't sure.
It felt like we were adding injury to insult, like these boys needed healing. And instead of bringing that to them, we were adding more trauma, and so I think I just carried so much heaviness and guilt for a long time, until God gave me that picture. And I think I began to heal at that point.
Yeah.
That's very cool. Well, how can people, I know you have a blog that you guys have, or shares, do you have it? How can people find that, your writing?
It's www.wander-more.blog. And I started when we were traveling with our kids. And then once we settled down, it kind of morphed into just writing about things that I care about. So.
Very cool. We have so many like strange coincidences,
know,
which is
I was
actually
gonna say,
just
we
a
have-
God story, honestly, because like you guys are literally from our backyard. I mean, you're not here anymore, but then you guys are like, then we did RV travel life for a little while, not near as long as you guys did, but just all kinds of fun,
Stayed in
like
Montana
connect. Yeah.
for a while,
Yeah. And you guys were at the church that we were at for a while. Just,
which we're not there anymore.
yeah, not there anymore. Whole nother story about
You can come
that. But yeah.
We'll do a part 2 with you guys about that.
Yeah,
but-
he's like, you can come back to Montana. Yeah, we're not in Montana. We're not at that old church anymore. But anyway, when you guys get out here, we'll definitely have to visit and get together because we're just right down the street from where y'all used to be. So,
We'd like that.
Yeah.
well, very cool, guys. Very cool. Well, everybody, just be praying for this process as all this information comes out. I just want to say to our listeners and our viewers, just be praying for all these families, but also all this process as it's all coming out, because I believe God has something in store for all this. I don't know what it is, but I believe it's all a divine timing and convergence. And so we'll just be praying for justice to be done, whatever that looks like, and this information to get in the hands of the right people, also to protect others,
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. One thing we have to say is that Keith Lashbrook and Vance Cherry are still out there, they're just out there. So their name needs to be known to anyone who knows them or is around them.
And the reason they're still out there is because criminal charges could not be brought because it was in Haiti. And so that's why it's such a mess. So there were civil suits and things that went on with Globe, but these guys are still out there, and it's like, and it's proven that they've done this stuff to children. So they're dangerous people. We'll end with that. All right, guys. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you guys so
Thank you.
much for sharing your story.